So Frank, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and Salesforge?
Hey guys, so yes, I'm Frank, one of the three co-founders here at the Forge. We have a product called Salesforge, which is how we're typically known, but we also have a bunch of other forges. I spent over a decade in sales, and sort of 21 months ago, have built a company called Salesforge out of Europe, essentially giving the big companies in B2B a much higher probability in attaining the pipeline targets. The way that we do that, we essentially combine human labor, so a typical sales team or your founder, whatever, together with AI agents in one environment. So think of it as a sort of a Google Ads account. So in Google Ads, you can run sort of, a campaign on manual bidding. So this is where humans essentially intervene, do everything. This is essentially how sales is done today. But essentially the new wave of doing sales, which essentially helps you to augment your current, sort of sales team, is by leveraging sort of these AI agents. And in Google Ads, these are sort of automated campaigns, right? Where you set sort of a target. The target is, hey, I need X number of conversions at this sort of CPA, so cost per acquisition, right? And then Google uses big data and machine learning models to help you to drive towards that behavior. And that's very similar also on the agentic front. You use AI agents to give the sort of a goal. The goal is, let's say, to book a meeting and to do it in a particular way. All right, so you can definitely leverage generative AI, so large language models to help you to compute essentially copies and stuff like that. But you also can leverage ML models to predict, for example, when to send an email and many other things. So we are headed not just in the world of sales, but also in a bunch of other functions, whether that's finance, engineering, etc., where you will see ultimately leaner and meaner teams leveraging these sort of let's call it automations or agentic capabilities to help you ultimately generate more output for the same headcount, and that also helps you to minimize the necessity to sort of hire more individuals, and ultimately making companies a lot more profitable, and hence needing less VC money today than you may have had to had to raise sort of a few years ago. So yeah.
Love that. And tell me a bit about how fast you guys are growing, because you guys are growing at a rapid pace.
Yeah, so in our space, let's call it the sales execution space. So that's maybe kind of broadly gonna name it. We are, as far as I know, the fastest growing company in the first 12 months at least. We grew from $0 to $3 million from the inception. So, but then we don't, as I mentioned, we don't have just one product. We have multiple products. So we're a bit like what we call modular in terms of play. In terms of sort of headcount, so just last year, sort of around January, February time. So essentially this time last year, there were just 3 co-founders in the business. Right now, there's about 37 employees, and we're sort of organically sort of adding more headcount and adding that across multiple different forges or functions that we need. But yeah, we need that sort of what we call a necessary evil, so more headcount, even though I'm a big proponent of agentic capabilities and automations, which is typically the first thing that we would consider before we would hire people into the business.
Absolutely love that. I think there is, whatever you just told me is fantastic, right? I want to ask you, are you guys VC backed or are you guys bootstrapped?
So we did raise $500,000 in the early days. We thought we were gonna burn cash, but that just never happened. So we're always profitable again since day zero. We thought we're gonna grow much slower than we anticipated, but then with the product market fit and everything, you just saw that beautiful hockey stick, and then we were acquiring more customers and higher paying customers much faster than we really thought. And the other kind of dilemma is that we didn't hire maybe people fast enough as well into the business. Because as I said, we typically look at sort of, using AI agents, using automation tools like N8N or Make.com to make our business sort of leaner and meaner. But, at the same time, for the roles that we did have, we couldn't find the right bumps to ultimately put them on those seats, that we had available. And yeah, that ultimately has cost us potentially also growth. So, because, one of the things that I do say is that, okay, so if you have a particular problem, so let's say we grew to $3 million, by the way, without a head of growth in the company. So that means, no head of marketing, no head of growth, and you still grow to $3 million. And so we've had a huge problem, let's say, to hire a head of growth. Now we do have one, but, to $3 million, we didn't have one. And naturally, an AI agent cannot solve that problem. And any software automation cannot solve that problem. Outsourcing to an agency is also a really bad call. So yeah, we're really looking for that ideal candidate. And right now we do have a guy, his name is Christian. He's based in London, who's heading up the growth to 10 million essentially ARR as the
Shout
next
out,
milestone
Kristen.
of the business. So,
Yeah, awesome. Shout out to Kristen. Now, Frank, I want to talk about your LinkedIn presence, right? Because you've obviously done incredible things. And you could say, if you were not present on LinkedIn the way you are right now, if you weren't, let's say, documenting your journey, announcing what you guys are doing, how fast you're growing, do you think Salesforce would still be at this level? Or do you think your founder brand definitely had an effect taking it to that level?
110%. So the
Mm.
in this business, without having the founder brand, we would not be where we are. And you only need to activate just one of the profiles, which is
Really?
one of the three founders, right? So it had to kind of sort of be me because the other two co-founders, they're engineers, right? So it's highly
Yeah,
unlikely that
yeah, yeah.
engineers would take off. However,
Yeah.
however, when we did analyze all the top performing posts last year, because typically the engineering founders don't post that frequently, when they do post and something is of potential of going viral, then they did
Mhm.
go viral. So essentially they have essentially have posts that have outperformed any of my posts last year, as an example,
Interesting.
and that's because they post rarely. But when they do, they post super quality content or something that can have the ability to go viral. So I always then what I'm trying to say is apart from having this, let's say, the main maybe person in the company
Yeah.
leading with their brand, have these, sort of two other, either the co-founders could be also head of growth with somebody, essentially have this sort of other people helping you grow the brand. And I think there's other companies that have done this really successfully who are, let's say, competitors of ours. So that would be, for example, lemlist.com. There's a company in
Mm.
France. They,
Guillaume.
for
Yeah, yeah,
example,
yeah.
have about 10 people being sort of super active on LinkedIn and sharing the expertise for their particular area. There's another company that comes to mind out of Macedonia called HeyReach. HeyReach are in the
Mm.
LinkedIn automation space. They also leverage sort of 5 to 10 sort of profiles to do a really good job. We're not doing that of a good job as in having that many people yet.
Yeah.
So it is kind of heavily driven for now by me, but we are looking to activate additional, sort of 5 to 10 profiles that will be sort of to a similar level that I'm
Interesting.
currently at in terms of consistency, but also very important in terms of also the quality of the posts.
No, absolutely love that. And I actually used to work with Thibaut. Like his product Taplio was acquired by Guillaume, and they're great guys, right? They're really taking that grow publicly and document your journey things to the next level, right? Crazy content. Now, you mentioned something that I want to touch upon. You said that other co-founders they're more technical level, you could say they're engineers. So what is the difference between the kind of content that you put out versus the kind of content that they put out?
Good question. So I put out a lot of content when it comes to sort of building in public and sort of educating the our current ICP and the future
Okay.
ICP about a product, kind of sharing a lot of value when it comes to building the company, right? Or
Okay.
sharing everything that has to do with sales, essentially.
Interesting. Okay.
What I've done in the past, maybe how things are changing, where the world is headed. So really spearheading sort of the brand. However, when it comes to the other founders, they typically would share. So, for example, I think the most trending post that one of them had was around hiring.
Yeah.
Essentially, we were hiring somebody for a machine learning engineer, and we had this sort of, let's call it an incident, where actually on the call we thought we were speaking to a North Korean that was faking sort of
Really?
his face. And that was the whole sort of interview was recorded, so we do have the snippet where we asking sort of to wave your hand to see whether we can see your real face, and then actually the guy drops off. And then, yes, there's apparently a
Wow.
whole trend around North Koreans applying for jobs in the West, and we were essentially we thought we were speaking to one of them. So they do sort of fake the face as well, and many other things. And then that was the most trending post. So, but ultimately, this is something that's not about building a company, but this is my life as it's sort of you taking that from how shall I say this? From your daily life, what you're doing as a CTO.
Mhm.
So one of the main things that the CTO also does in this company and a bunch of other companies is you hire a lot, right? So, but what is a story that you could share with your audience, which would be like super rare, but super interesting, right? To also share. So hiring could be one of them, but it could be something else when it comes to, say, team management, when it comes to their perception, sort of growing the company on the ground, and what are the kind of hiring challenges maybe when it comes to hiring people into the office versus remote. So, but it wouldn't be like, hey, let me teach you, 1, 2 things about sales. It wouldn't be anything like that, because it's not like they've been in sales for a decade. So it also will not resonate with audience, because their audience essentially is a bunch of other engineers, right? So my audience is very different to their audience on LinkedIn. So if their audience essentially are a lot of engineers, and my audience are a lot of salespeople, a lot of ICPs, then you should also adjust your audience. But it's still, at the end of the day, brand building. The reason why they would share their post on LinkedIn is to ultimately acquire a lot more candidates for the business. Whereas my primary goal is to acquire a lot more leads for the softwares that we have, right? So the purposes are a bit different there. So and LinkedIn is one of our top 3 acquisition channels. So making sure that I'm consistent on a daily basis and I would share something that would be perceived of value is super, super important, irrespective of what the reach says. So sometimes, LinkedIn may reward you. Sometimes LinkedIn may penalize you for good content. And that's fine. It's like, a bit like Russian roulette sometimes with, what does LinkedIn think about this piece of content? But I'm sort of genuinely trying to see, what sort of content that I could provide to the audience that will give them sort of a tidbit on sales, and ultimately sort of improving a bit by bit on a daily basis. Because the way that I, talk to others about LinkedIn is like, LinkedIn is like a newspaper essentially, right? So you need to ultimately engineer that feed. So remove all the people that don't provide value to you, and follow people or connect with people that provide a lot of value for you. And if I'm able to provide you, a tiny bit of value every single day, let's say, become essentially 1% better every single day, then you're exponentially growing, right? So over the course of the year. So I am trying to do that and kind of share bits, as a founder, what are the challenges that I'm having, what is it that I'm building.
Documenting a journey, basically.
Yeah, talking about the journey, yes.
Yeah.
Sharing it public ultimately, as a founder, as much as I can. But then, there's some topics that I do share publicly, and then there's some topics that I don't share publicly. And there's always a debate of how much you should share in public. Because also, let's say now in our case, we have like over 100 competitors, right? That also are on LinkedIn on a daily basis, on X, etc. But you have to be mindful in terms of what is it that you share, because you know that your competitors are watching you pretty much every single day. And then I have to be sort of aware of that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you said you said something that ties into my next question. You said that I don't create content so that the LinkedIn algorithm loves it or not. Regardless of that, you create content because you feel like there's value in it, right? In my experience, when founders do create content for 1, 2, or 3 months, if they create content, if it doesn't get a lot of engagement or great numbers on LinkedIn, they get discouraged. They feel like nobody's reading it, nobody's going to consume this. Maybe we are wasting our time. And that is why they gradually stop posting with consistency, and then they leave the platform altogether. In your experience, how do you keep yourself consistent, knowing that, I'm not getting great numbers, but I know that the content that I put out is valuable? And do you get any signals that say like, hey, the right people are actually reading my content?
Good question. So what the most important thing that I look at is sort of what I would describe reach. And reach essentially is impressions, if you have to look at KPI. The more impressions you generate, the better it is for your business. I'm not chasing for likes, comments, etc. Yes, they can improve that. And yes, I could game the system. Yes, I could create, what's called engagement pods, where essentially you can see that some posts are sort of artificially sort of boosted with a lot of comments, etc. But I just try to stay away from that, because actually that's damaging for your personal brand and for your company brand when you do something like that. Because people definitely do take notice. People are not dumb, when it comes to artificially boosting engagement. Yes, it could potentially push you, you can become more visible in terms of your post. But then people sort of get disappointed, because when they see all these sort of comments and likes, that they see that there's a lot of them sort of are AI generated, or like
most of it is garbage.
Comments.
Yeah,
so it's just garbage, right, in terms of comments.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking that individual, that let's call it influencer or whatever, starts to essentially is gaming just the LinkedIn algo, right? So you don't want to be one of those individuals ultimately, right? So you want to be always known to, hey, providing value. And yes, if there's no comments, totally fine. But what I really care about is like Am I generating impressions? And yes, sometimes you generate like, I don't know, 500 impressions. Other days I'm generating 20,000 impressions. Other days I'm generating
Yeah.
100,000 impressions for post. Right, so it really, really varies. But the way that I naturally track whether whether I'm generating something from that. So one of the things I do, let's say within the Forge ecosystem, so across all the softwares, I'm asking whether you hear about us. So a lot of people will say, I've heard about it on LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
mean, LinkedIn, we don't run any ads as an example, or not yet at least. So the only reason why you've heard about us is either I posted something and it resonated with you and you want to check this out, or one of the other individuals, for example, that maybe is using our software,
Word
has
of
posted
mouth.
something about us, and then because of that, they went on to check out one of the softwares and sign up for a trial, for example. But then the other way to kind of check actually whether your strategy works or not is you can go to any sort of conference, any sort of offline event, and shake some hands with people that maybe you haven't spoken to for years and years. And typically the person will say something like, hey, Frank, listen, I know everything that's happening in your business because essentially I post every day. So it's very hard to miss me. I call that LinkedIn feed domination strategy.
Okay.
Ultimately, you dominate the feed of your audience quite aggressively. Aggressively means if you're posting on a daily basis, you are dominating the feed one way or the other. One way or the other, essentially, they're gonna see your posts. And of course, you want to make sure they don't unfollow you, right? Or
You
things like
actually have
that.
to put out quality content, right?
That's why you put out quality content, because
Yeah.
still you may be connected with the individual, but they may go to your profile and unfollow because they don't really enjoy your content at all. And then, so the other problem is because on LinkedIn, a lot of people talk about sort of very many sort of similar things. I'm also trying to find my own angle, being essentially authentic rather than just copy pasting, what everybody else is saying on LinkedIn. Because, you have to think about it from this standpoint that, let's say, that individual on LinkedIn, when they're consuming the content, they're following a lot of similar people, say, to Frank. So all these other people will talk about this thing, but it's very important that for me, I don't talk about the same thing, but I talk about something else because that makes it interesting for them to follow me, right? So I'm trying to, even though when it comes to talking about the same topic, let's say AI agents or email visibility, or a bunch of other topics, I'm trying to put our own perspective to things, so that, you don't follow the sheep, right? So in terms of,
True.
kind of always saying the
And
same thing, but you kind of say things maybe slightly different. And that ultimately also can increase the genuine engagement from the individuals because they're curious as to why you're saying things slightly different to everybody else.
one of my former clients actually summed this up very nicely, and my podcast audience is probably tired of hearing it, but it's so important and makes so much sense. He said, his name was Michael. He said it's not thought leadership if it's from a collective consciousness. So what you just said right now, that if everybody's talking about it and then you're talking about it in the same exact way as well, you're not going to stand out. You're going to be lost in the sea of sameness, right? So that is something I think incredibly important. And a lot of people miss it, even though if people are very consistent with content, like 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week, yet they talk about the stuff that everybody else is talking about, it's just not going to help out, right? So, Frank, I want to ask you, you have been super active on LinkedIn, and I assume with the rate that you guys are growing, you don't have a lot of time. It's not a luxury that you can afford, right? So how do you justify the time spent on the platform? How long does it take you to create content? Like, what's your current LinkedIn strategy looking like in terms of time investment?
Good question. So, so I think I spend about maybe at least an hour a day on LinkedIn as a CEO, and I have other things to do, as you can imagine. Now, why am I doing this? So you have to ask back in your mind a question: where does your ICP essentially live, and like honestly live? Means they spend multiple hours potentially per day on that platform. That means they live on that. So in our case, because we're targeting founders, salespeople, sales leaders, etc., they spend their time on LinkedIn because they're prospecting, right? And then as part of the prospecting, they will bump into Frank and his sort of posts, etc., right? His content. So it sort of makes sense that I would essentially spend my time on LinkedIn, but not just LinkedIn. There's also other places where your ICPs may spend on. So one of the things, for example, that's not being sort of utilized a lot is, for example, Reddit. Reddit, is essentially a forum, right? A bunch of people ask different questions, etc. But you also need to be sort of on Reddit, and you need to do what's called social listening to understand, whether when a person mentions a particular pain or a particular competitor, etc. You can also listen on that. But yeah, the way you, as I said, the way you justify that is, okay, you are spending this hour or 2 hours a day, but in the end of the day, that's like marketing, right? So you're
Yeah.
marketing yourself, your brand, your product to your audience. But the way you can justify that easily, so when you look at the impressions that you generate, let's say as a founder, you could look at what are the CPM rates for LinkedIn
Mm.
ads. So meaning how expensive is it actually to advertise on LinkedIn? And trust me, guys, it's super expensive. It's probably the number one most expensive platform to advertise
Yeah.
on. And if you look from a CPM, so cost per 1,000 miles, or essentially cost per 1,000 impressions, how much it's costing you to show ads versus you spending your time, you may realize that actually it's worthwhile to spend your own time on LinkedIn than spending on ads, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of think of it this way as well. Plus, naturally, people are more likely to convert through your content than also from ads as well,
People buy
right?
from
Because people
people.
buy from people.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's actually, this reminds me, I had a guest, his name is Justin Rowe, based out of the US. He runs a B2B ads agency on LinkedIn, probably the biggest in North America, actually. And he said if he calculated the amount of money he would need to invest in ads in order to generate the same amount of impressions through his organic content, and he said per month I would have to spend an additional $20,000 just to generate the same impressions. So as to just what you said right now, right? It's so worthwhile to be here present in terms of organic content as opposed to doing ads. Plus, now they've introduced thought leadership ads, which could introduce the more personal angle since you can promote your post through your company. But this brings me to my next question, Frank, and that is, I created a post about it today. Actually, a lot of people, leads specifically in B2B, they do not interact with you in public, but they're listening, they're consuming your content, and when they're ready to buy, they reach out. I'm curious, has that happened to you?
yes, so this is why I mentioned that the most important aspect when it comes to LinkedIn and posts is the reach. And
Mm,
that's not comments and likes, that's just impressions. So
mm,
if you're able to figure out how to generate impressions, that's the most important aspect. Now, one of the most probably easiest ways is not maybe the easiest way, but the one of the D ways how you can generate a lot of impressions. So of course, you can share a lot of knowledge, etc. on LinkedIn. But what people do love on LinkedIn is they love drama. And they
definitely.
love drama, a lot of drama. Essentially, when say one person goes up against the other individual, or one
Mm,
brand goes up against the other brand, and there's some sort of a conflict, and people have to take sides typically, right? Whether they support you, they cheer you up, and they say, "Great, go for it," or they're gonna boo you on comments. But I say there's no such a thing as bad PR.
publicity, yeah.
Like you just definitely have to be sort of clever about it. And one of the naturally folks who is relatively famous on LinkedIn on that is Adam Robinson from
Oh,
RB2B.
yeah. Our B2B, yeah.
Um, right? So who goes up against who got cease and desist letters and a bunch of other, and then he goes on LinkedIn and kind of talks about it. So he does a fantastic job, and his number one actually lead driver is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you're let's say a SaaS founder, it doesn't have to be SaaS, but ultimately if you're in B2B, you just need to have this one enemy, in mind that where you can create this sort of drama, and that's could be anybody. So we definitely have a bunch of drama to come later this year. Not gonna say what it is
Come
about,
later this year. Interesting. Okay.
but yeah, there's always drama, and we typically play friendly, but definitely you need to have at least this one competitor that you just
Yeah.
despise for
Mm,
various different reasons, or they despise you, and that's fine. You just need to have one, and that's the competitor that you can go up against and just go full on public.
mm,
Um, and as long as you're not lying, right? So as long as
yeah.
you're just giving your own perception. Yes, you are potentially advertising your competitor, but if you think of it this way, you have nothing to lose if your competitor is X times bigger. So, for example, the case of RB2B versus 6sense. 6sense is a massive company. RB2B is tiny, only $4 million in ARR. So RB2B has nothing to lose, and essentially you can
Mm,
latch on the audience of 6sense
true.
on LinkedIn, and you can transition some of their customers potentially to RB2B, or they could just buy RB2B as a second tool on top of 6sense, as an example, right? So this is why going after a competitor that has access to your ICP is super powerful, especially if that competitor is very well known on LinkedIn, right? And they have a lot of followers, etc., right? So
Yeah.
creating drama is super, super powerful. But naturally, there's also other ways to do that. But
Mm.
I think what people have a shy away from, and it's very easy, arguably, to create in terms of content, you can create that drama.
Yeah.
But other types of content, which takes definitely far longer to kind of to go into this, is like sharing like a lot of great knowledge on LinkedIn. Because of course that takes a lot more time to really think about, etc. But this is why a lot of folks out there use what's called ghostwriters, right? If you're
Yeah.
really struggling to come up with content, you can get these ghostwriters, right, to work for you. This is especially important for founders that don't necessarily have a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah. True.
We haven't used anybody, and the reason why we haven't used anybody because we haven't found really somebody that would click with our audience. Really, that's probably the honest
Really.
answer. Because ultimately, somebody that's a ghostwriter, right? So that will essentially craft the content for you, and then you publish it, right? So on LinkedIn, it has to come off, that this is exactly the way that Frank typically speaks about stuff, but the post is going to be just a lot better or a lot longer, right, in terms of content,
In
etc.
terms of
So that I
depth,
can
yeah.
focus my time on something else, right? So I think that the hardest thing, definitely for founders, is to find these sort of ghostwriters that have the domain expertise in the space. But if you do find one, like it's a no-brainer that you should be hiring these individuals if they can amplify the content, if they can sort of generate 10x more content than you generate right now, especially considering the fact that your ICP is on LinkedIn.
Was on LinkedIn.
So yeah, because otherwise you'll be forced to spend money on ads. Doesn't matter, LinkedIn, Google Ads, etc.
Yeah.
But not I definitely even have in my own career examples of where I was trying to convince the CEO to become more aware on LinkedIn. It's meaning more aware with their audience, essentially, and that means to activate the profile. So the reason why this was important, so I used to be in sales, right? So prior to running Salesforge. And one of the easiest ways how you can help me as a CEO to improve my conversion rate is if you keep on spreading the love about your own brand, and your own story, etc., because that helps the sales teams to convert, right? It's like you're my little sort of
Sales and
sidekick.
marketing, yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yes, they go hand in hand. But the main person in that organization where I was at was the CEO, and the CEO did not want to do anything on LinkedIn. He was like a ghost on LinkedIn, and that was not helping the sales team at all. And then when it came down to, let's say, quarterly reviews and like, hey, what is it that we can do to improve our conversion rates or increase our sales pipeline? And I would typically mention, hey, listen, our ICP is on LinkedIn. It would be really cool that you could start posting daily, about all things on this particular product, or your journey, etc. And the person just wasn't doing it. And that's an example where I see it as especially when your ICP is on LinkedIn, as a major failure, essentially. And then you see that, it has cost the company, a lot of revenue ultimately. That's how I look at it. But yeah, so, I can understand definitely the argument if the ICP is not on LinkedIn, then that's a different story. But if your ICP is on LinkedIn, and you can just see in your attribution, or maybe if you ask a question, where do you hear about us? And if a lot of people mention LinkedIn,
Self-reported attribution, yeah.
Yes, self-reported attribution, then you should definitely be investing more time. Yeah, that's the easiest way to kind of qualify in your head whether you should be spending your time on LinkedIn or not.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you so much for everything, Frank. I think this was an incredibly insightful episode, not just for founders in general, but people who are thinking of doing this whole founder-led marketing thing for all the reasons that you mentioned. I made a post about this. Again, I'm going to mention it. I suppose the only question that you could ask yourself if you can be on LinkedIn or should be or not is your ICP on LinkedIn or not? If they are, you absolutely need to be here. So thank you, Frank. Hope you had a good time. I had a great time. And yeah, appreciate all of the information that you shared with us.
Thanks. And we'll be in touch.